Good afternoon. My guest is Lawrence Millman. He has written over 16 books. The most recent, Arctic Ice Poems. Is that, did I get that?
No, the title is Goodbye Ice Arctic Poems.
Goodbye. Say it again.
Goodbye Ice Arctic Poems.
Sorry about that. He's a mycologist. He has studied fungi all over the world, and he's made over 40 trips and expeditions to the Arctic and subarctic. First of all, how has it been for you in Somerville, as for being a scientist and a poet and a writer and many other things? Has it been a good place for you?
Cambridge?
Well, Somerville. In other words, you're on the border of Somerville.
Oh, the merging of the two. Yeah. Well, it's been a very good place for me because I can escape from it very easily. Mm-hmm. And I don't need to have a car. I regard cars as 2-ton wheelchairs. I do much of my travel when I'm not flying to the Arctic on foot because I can see a lot more and I can stop and look. Whereas if I were in a car, if I stopped and looked at anything, I'd be bashed by another car. So I, within 10 to 15 minutes walk of virtually everything I need, and then I hop on the T, go to Logan, and off I go to Labrador, Hudson Bay, or a place like that.
How often?
Much less often now, thanks to COVID. Certain borders were closed, and now there's a bureaucracy to get back and forth. But in the old days, at least once and maybe twice a year, and I used to tell people that I headed north for my health.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Most people go south, right?
I can't tolerate heat. Even today, where the temperature is, I'm not sure what, it's a bit humid, 82. I am delighted to be here with you, first of all, but secondly, in the AC.
That's right.
And I often here, even if the temperature is 50, I will wear a shirt sleeve and be perfectly content.
Well, being an environmentalist, you might not like the AC, though. It's destroying
You're
the
right.
ozone.
You're right. And I'm fence-sitting on that.
Yeah, yeah. Now one of your, you've written extensively about the fungi of New England, and other places. I know you've studied all over the world. For the layman, tell us, why do you find fungi? I mean, it's a big question. So
why I find them interesting, and I find them absolutely fascinating. They offer an incredible variety of sizes, shapes, colors, and smell. Edibility is the least interesting aspect. You never know what you're going to find next. They offer a realm of chance. You never know what you're going to see next, when where it will come. Even as I was walking here, despite the dry weather, I saw something in mulch that I wasn't too certain of that I'm going to pick up on my way back. And so I regard this as the very opposite of the rigid 9-to-5 workaday life of most people. I'm out looking for fungi, and I know the variety of habitats in trunks, under logs, in dung, and other places where I'm inclined to look. And I find them, I feel a sense of, what should we say, connection with them. I have to say this, that it has been determined through DNA work that we're related to fungi. We have a common ancestor, 500 million years ago. Plants have a totally different ancestor. Fungi, like us, are heterotrophs. That means they get their nutrients from the world around them, as do we. Whereas plants primarily photosynthesize from up there. If there were, decaying organic matter in the vicinity of a plant or tree, That would enrich the soil, but it wouldn't necessarily be of value to the plant or tree in the way that bright sunlight would be.
Now, I was going to ask you, what was the seed, the early seed for your wanderlust?
It was, I've always been inclined to pursue the opposite. And I grew up in the middle, Kansas City, Missouri. So I've been devoted to the edges, that is, the remote edges of the world. And even as I was growing up, I would sit in the remote corners of our half-acre backyard and read and think. And Walden by Thoreau was an early Bible for me. And my father helped me pitch a tent when I was, I've forgotten, 11 or 12 in the backyard. And I lived in a sort of like a Thoreauvian hermit for 1 week in the summer.
Okay.
So, I would say that it comes from there. I don't know how genetic it is. Neither of my parents had this inclination. But my mother was an avid naturalist, a vice president of the Missouri Nature Conservancy. So I acquired that from her.
Okay. You also, not only have you done poetry, I was reading about you. No, first I want to say, you say you don't like the 9 to 5, but surely in the course of your life you had a 9 to 5 job, didn't you ever?
Once when I was about 16, but it didn't last. I was given a job. I think it was some sort of insurance agency, and I was doing grunt work, and I kept sitting aside and reading and forgetting to do the work. But I've never had a 9 to 5 job in my life. I've taught at universities, but that's not 9 to 5.
You were like what were you teaching full time at a university?
I was teaching full time at a variety of schools, but I made a point of not being on the tenure track, because being on the tenure track would push me in the direction of a 9 to 5 job. And
so you took temporary positions, or
visiting, adjunct, that sort of thing, and I what I didn't want to do was go to meetings, because to me there's no greater obscenity than the word meeting.
I know what you mean. Yeah, they can be deadly.
Yeah, but I have taught it. I did teach. I haven't taught in a long time by choice. But I teach the outdoors. I take people on nature walks and on mushroom walks.
Okay. Now I was reading that you have a book. It's titled a book of origins. There's satiric stories, and I was reading some of the bizarre stories that were in there. And one, you had a number of them, but one you said. You had a U.S. president who is fictional. Well, maybe it's not fictional. We never know. We have a U.S. president who decides to attack another country because he's horny. Tell me about the germ of the idea for that, or what's...
Well, the germ of the idea for this book, which is the Book of Origins, and I wrote Origins. I spent a lot of time collecting ethnographic lore from northern native people. It's one of the reasons that I headed north, was to hang out with people who were traditional. And I would collect stories from them. This is how the earth came about. And I mean, there is a story, an Inuit story about the moon pursuing the sun, moon being male, sun being female, in hopes of mating with it. And yeah, I think the inspiration behind some of these origins, I'll tell you one right now which you may not have read, which I rather like. A bunch of stoned Stone Agers are sitting around a fire smoking weed and relatively happy. And Charles Darwin shows up and says, "Sorry, boys, but you're going to have to leave." And they said, "Leave? where the hell are we going to go? This place is like our home, man. And he said, sorry, I hate to tell you, it's evolution. Hell, that sucks. Suddenly out of the woods comes a fellow in a three-piece suit with a copy of the Wall Street Journal under his arm, shakes Darwin's hand firmly, and says, I'm Cro-Magnon. And it goes on for one or two more sentences. And the Stone Agers pick up their gear, cursed, and walked away. And the final line is, and they never worked again. And that's like the origin of evolution. But I probably wouldn't have written any of these stories, but for the fact that I was collecting, among other stories, origin tales from native people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are darkly humorous. I mean, one of the things that people don't seem to realize, because most people think of native folk tales as being cutesy-poo Saturday morning Grange stories that kids can appreciate. Not the case at all. These were the survival mechanism for many a native person, often told in the winter when the situation often told in the winter when the situation was dark, cold, and gloomy. And they had a dark sense of humor because humor is a survival mechanism.
Gallows humor. Yeah.
Yeah, and so a number of the stories that I collected over the years, have a sort of, we say, R-rated quality that didn't appear in books of Native American tales up until, well, a couple of my books appeared. Mm-hmm. There's
there's always the one about the story of the pipe, and the story of the pipe by Black. I can't remember. I usually teach that story. I mean, it's about how the Indians came about, and creation stories and stuff.
Well, there's a story about martens, and martens are animals that live in the deep part of the forest. And this is an Innu story from Labrador. And there was a marten that was having an affair with a native hunter's wife. And so many of these stories have a kind of animals and people. There's only a gray area separating them. The marten was having an affair with the wife. And one day, the hunter came back early and found the marten with his wife. And he took a pot of boiling water and poured it over the marten. And the marten fled into the deepest part of the woods. And the old man who told me this story said, and to this very day, martens live in the deepest part of the woods because they're afraid that angry husbands will spill boiling water on them, even today.
Okay. Now we're seeing that you seem to have a subversive nature, I would say, and I read your essay about why you left the prestigious Explorers Club
yes.
Based on Park Avenue in New York, right?
No, it was Upper East Side, 71st Street.
And tell me, what was give me a brief background about the Explorers Club and why you soured on it.
Yeah, well, the Explorers Club was initially devoted to exploration, and helping to fund people who went to the far corners of the globe, true explorers, people who blood, sweat, toil, and tears, as Winston Churchill would say. But slowly but surely, in the 21st century, it began moving in the direction of another direction. One direction was that they needed money, and the best way to get money was to admit individuals who had lots of it, even if they didn't know the difference between exploration and a hole in the ground. Also, and I don't think I mentioned this in the article, which you can find both on my website and there's a website called the Explorer's Web, where I have a number of essays. One of the problems was that so many so-called explorers were doing work on their Upper East Side apartments with their computers. There was a woman who was documenting, I think, both wildlife and plant life in a remote area of Costa Rica. And I asked her where, and she told me, and I said, oh no, I've actually been there. She said, oh, I haven't. I'm doing all this work on my computer at home. And then what happened too was that various individuals who had billions were being admitted and lauded. Individuals like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and to misquote Groucho Marx, I would never belong to a club that either of those two individuals belonged to.
I mean, there were legitimate explorers in the club, right?
Oh, they're increasingly fewer, because I'm not the only one who has dropped out.
Well, then why are they going to go to the club if they're not an explorer? They're just to have prestige or...
Prestige. This
Yeah.
is the key word, and it's the adjective that's invariably used with the Explorers Club, the prestigious Explorers Club. And one of the things I did, well, before I dropped out, but I thought anyone could get into the Explorers Club. So I created a person and an application, a fellow named Albert Yeti, who was a specialist in abominable snowman. He went on any number of expeditions to the Himalayas, and he came close to getting admitted, and I finally fessed up, and they got very angry because they said, this is, most of the people here are volunteers. The reason they're volunteers is they're wealthy, and they can afford to volunteer, and you've put them through work, getting them to evaluate this fellow and get him into the club. And I did not win any
friends.
yes, I didn't win any welcomes from the people who told me about this, the upper echelon folks, when I said, well, yes, but in fact, I have to say that a non-existent person some of them can be much better than some of the people who are in the club right now.
Well, why did you go to the club?
Initially, because, well, I was nominated, and this was in the early 90s, and it was pretty much devoted to exploration then. Mm-hmm. Remote places, people who went to the Arctic on their own and suffered the appropriate blood, sweat, toil, and tears, and, provided knowledge to the outside world of their trips. And that knowledge was not via a computer, but it was via actual field work and contact with remote indigenous people.
Were you a fan of Jack London when you were growing
Absolutely.
up? Yeah.
He may be, it's hard to say who one's favorite writer is, but he may well be my favorite American writer.
Yeah.
And he was when I was a kid, too.
Yeah, yeah.
But a lot of his
They
work...
did a movie way back about one of his stories called Call the Wild?
Call the Wild.
Yeah, it wasn't very good.
I didn't know. His kids' books, I Called the Wild, and what was the other popular one? I don't even know if I read it. I mean, when I was 11 or 12, I read The Sea Wolf.
Oh, okay.
And then Martin Eden. But his short stories, some of them are absolutely superb. They have a contemporary resonance that's hard to believe.
Now, why did you find, in your latest book, Goodbye Ice Arctic Poems, right? Why did you decide to take a poetic take rather than a journalistic take or scientific take on the Arctic? What were you trying to achieve by taking a poetic treatment of it?
Well, it's very hard to say. I think my muse was responsible for that rather than me. And I also felt that a way I could reach in a quick and easy and potent way certain readers I hadn't reached before when I was writing travel essays or longer essays or works that were more verbally abstruse. I thought poems I also, some of the poems in this book are transcriptions of songs and chants I collected from mostly Inuit in the Arctic, in Greenland, but also Innu in Labrador, who are not the same as the Inuit. And so I had that in one of the gray chambers of my head, the songs and chants I had collected, which struck me as being resonant in ways that the poems in the New York Times, New York review of each other's books are not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I think some Inuit, is that how it's pronounced? Inuit?
Inuit, yeah.
Shaman or something said to you, we can't, by actually putting words on the page, we
Yes.
cage them.
Not a shaman. He was a fellow in Upernavik, northwestern Greenland, and there was a word that translates as bon appetit, and I wasn't familiar with it, and I asked him to spell it so I could write it down, and he said, "Oh no, I can't tell, I don't want you to write it down, because when you write something down, it's like you put the words in a cage, and it's like putting a bird in a cage."
So that's what you did in your book, put them in a cage.
I put them in a cage, and I admitted that too.
Well, you have cockroaches in a cage, don't you?
Well, in a terrarium.
In a terrarium.
Yeah, but they can't escape it. They're sort of caged.
Yeah.
Yes, but I have to pursue briefly that reference so that people who are tuning into this won't think that, I go around the kitchen collecting kitchen cockroaches. And
No, you told me about these.
no, I know, but I know. I'm saying it not.
No, they are not your average. The Roach Motel won't, capture them.
No, these are giant Madagascar hissing cockroaches, and they haven't changed at all in 300 million years. And I can gaze at them, and my backward nature is inspired, given how old they are. They also move in a slow, lumbering way that very different from the kitchen cockroaches. And they're interesting. They behave somewhat like humans. They hiss through what equivalent of vocal cords, but the males are very aggressive and the females are very docile. And the males have horns. I've often wondered why human males don't have horns.
So I guess when they want a female, they're horny.
They're horny. Yeah, they're horny. They're horny. But they butt each other with a female, and the head butter wins.
Right. Well, anyway, we got about 7 minutes for you to read from your work.
Oh, yes.
Do you have any reading coming up that you want to?
No, I don't have anything coming up that I know of. I'd have to think about it, and another minute would pass.
Okay.
But
it's important to get the work out, to get them
okay.
out of their cage.
Yes. All right. Well, no, this is short. I'm going to read a few short ones. I hear her now, a delicate little brook, giggling at me. She's so bashful, she hides under the snow, but she still giggles, sometimes even chuckles, and her sweet voice dismisses the cold. Now,
did you ever study poetry, or was
well, I have a doctorate in English.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So I try to keep it a secret. I'm not surprised. I try to keep it a secret. I tell people that I'm a prisoner of war of academia.
Yeah.
And here, eider duck. On a frigid, wind-blasted day with volcanic ash coughed up by Berenberg, coming down like a squall, she sits contentedly on her nest, and with the brownish gray down below her springy chest feathers, she gives her eggs a warmth so exceptional, I can't help but say to her, with only a hint of anthropomorphism, "Thanks, Mother." I'm going to.
How did you, just out of interest, how did you have a PhD in English, but your life's work has been as a mycologist, right?
I decided I go through the opposite. So I have a PhD, and then I went to live in the west of Ireland, where I wrote a book, Our Like Will Not Be There Again, about oral lore and storytelling, because I was tired of written word and I wanted to hang out with people who communicated via the spoken word.
Okay, okay.
Hey, look, a land bridge, shouted our Paleolithic brethren, pointing at the Bering Strait. But just as they were starting out on their celebrated journey from Siberia to the New World, one of their shamans had a vision of destroyed habitats, unrestrained development, permafrost methane emissions, and toxic waste everywhere. Stop, we must go back, he cried out to his constituents. But his warning did no good. For humankind can only go forward, never back, never return to the less poisoned past. Now I'm going to read the title poem. Goodbye, ice, ancient membrane of the Arctic. Goodbye, shimmering companion who speaks in groans and cracks, roars, shrieks, and silences. You're melting into oblivion. And with your passing, the myriad lives you've blessed, polar bears, seals, and walrus, amphipods grazing on algae and lipid-rich zooplankton, will become homeless forevermore.
What do you see in 20 years for from the Arctic and other?
I won't say that I see it as a tropical paradise, but I see a lot more people going there, a lot more tourism, and I once lectured on a cruise ship, and I was told not to talk about climate change because it would depress people, and they were paying lots of money not to be depressed. So I see it as relatively ice-free. I see the native people as being pretty globalized, and I see the habitats being destroyed, I could say, or overwhelmed by vascular plants coming up from the south, which is happening even now.
So not a bright future.
I don't see it as a bright future, no.
No. Well, thank you for joining us on Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer.
My pleasure, Doug. I'm glad to be here.